welcome, 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 welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. It's a rainy night here. I am in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I have been having busy times at work lately. It is UN week, but that's okay because every opportunity I get to talk to all of you is a privilege. You all are really amazing, and you all keep me going. And I must tell you from the bottom of my heart how deeply appreciative I am of all of you. How deeply appreciative I am of all of you. We are a very special community on these streams. We really are. We have our running jokes. We know each other well. We do our roll call. I call out the same places and the same towns because it's the same people. Once you get a little bit of this, you come back for more. We have something special here. We really have something special here. It's a really beautiful community that we have. So welcome everybody. Glad you're here. And if you're new, welcome to you as well, right? You're just as loved if you are new. So glad to have you all here. So like I said, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always a pleasure to interact with all of you. And the way we do things is I give my opening remarks. And then from there, after I give my opening remarks, then from there, we do the roll call. And then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. You know. The pen I'm using tonight, and thank you, Third Rail. Thank you very much for your super chat. The pen I'm using tonight is from the Hotel Milo, where we had our conference in California. I happened to have one of their pens, one of the pens they supplied us with, and that will be the pen with which I write your super chat questions down on this notepad. So there you go. You know, okay. Chinese real estate market crash. And that's how it works. So yeah, first comes the opening remarks. Next comes Guzman Gonzalo. Next, after that, comes the roll call. And after that, then I just answer the super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's how we roll. So, folks, I guess I'll just jump right into it. We did see today Joe Biden's debut speech to the United Nations. I did listen to most of the speech. For those of you that did not hear Joe Biden's remarks before the UN General Assembly, I don't know quite how to say this. You didn't miss much. You didn't miss much. I joked that perhaps Big Pharma could consider marketing that Joe Biden speech to the public as a sleep aid, because as I was listening to it this morning, preparing to report on it, it was a very boring speech. Joe Biden, he is against world hunger. He is against disease. He wants countries to cooperate with other countries. He's against terrorism. He said absolutely nothing. Morning greetings from Hong Kong. Well, thank you, Neil Fraser, and shout out to you. Thank you. He said absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing in his speech. It was dull. I mean, probably the most interesting thing that he said was when he said that he didn't want a new Cold War. He didn't want a new Cold War. Isn't that nice? And he said that he wanted to, always stand behind the allies of the United States. Isn't that nice? I think he's against cancer also. We need to, find cures for cancer and tackle diseases. Yeah, it was climate change. Oh, we got to do something about climate change. I have not seen a UN speech that lacked content as bad as this one from a U.S. leader in a while. When Obama was at the UN, he often, he used his opportunity to go after Russia and China. He tried to be Mr. Human Rights. He would, talk about ridding the world of nuclear weapons. Obama was trying to be Superman at the UN. Donald Trump, on the other hand, he had this, F you world tone. He would come to the UN with, socialism has never worked anywhere. And, the sovereignty of nations has got to be respected. I mean, he was a very much thanks for all the free entertainment and making the shifts go by at the warehouse faster. You're very welcome, Fire Dog. Very welcome. But, Donald Trump went in there with this F you tone. He wasn't even really speaking to the UN. He was performing for a domestic audience, and there were awkward moments where he expected more applause, and the UN wasn't applauding for him. Donald Trump, he did that. Joe Biden got up and he read a bunch of platitudes from a teleprompter. Platitudes. Google that word, platitudes. It's one of those fancy words that English majors use, but it is the most accurate term to describe what Joe Biden's speech was. It was many, many platitudes. It was many, many, many platitudes. It was a pile of gigantic platitudes. We've got the back of our allies. We pulled out of Afghanistan. It's the beginning. It's the end of an era. Climate change, bad. Cancer, bad. Terrorism, bad. Work together, countries. Be friends. Be nice. Yawn. It was bad. It was, wow. I was not expecting, on some level, you do have to give, credit. You have to give credit to the White House team that they could write such a long speech with no content. It is very hard to say nothing for as long as he did, and he said nothing for quite some time. Now, what's interesting is that it may be what was not said that is the issue, not what was actually said. And that's kind of the brilliance of it, right? Sometimes it is what is left unsaid that is the drama, not what is actually said. And you'll notice, so Joe Biden, he gave his speech, and the French President Macron was supposed to give his speech to the UN General Assembly afterwards, and it was to be a pre-recorded statement, right? First, the first speaker was Bolsonaro, the second speaker was Biden. And then they're giving leaders the option. They can either come in person or do a pre-recorded statement. And they were expecting that the French president would speak. He was on the schedule to be a speaker following Joe Biden. The French President Macron canceled his speech after Joe Biden spoke. Now, that's big. That's big. That is certainly big. That is something. That is something. Canceled his speech. The French President Macron will not be giving a speech to the UN General Assembly, but on Monday, the French Foreign Minister will be giving a speech to the UN General Assembly. Very interesting. Something that Biden said, or most likely something that Joe Biden did not say in his UN speech, touched a nerve in Paris. Something happened. Something happened. Now, what's going on, for those of you who aren't aware, there's this whole situation with the AUKUS deal. Do folks know about the AUKUS? The AUKUS Pact. The AUKUS Pact. The AUKUS Pact is the fact that Australia and the United Kingdom and the United States have signed a military alliance in the Pacific. And as a result, Australia is canceling its purchase of diesel-electric submarines from France, and instead it is buying nuclear submarines from the United States. That's a little bit of a loss for France. They lost about $65 billion. But it's a little more than that. It's a little bit more than that. Because everyone knows the AUKUS deal is about militarizing the Pacific. against China. That's what it's about. It is about the Asian pivot that Barack Obama started. It is about Donald Trump and his trade war. It is about the escalation against socialism in China now that their economy is speeding ahead and the West is crashing and burning in the aftermath of the pandemic. That's what it's about. It is about the escalation against China. Meanwhile, France and Germany and Belgium and Italy and Spain are much friendlier to France, much friendlier to France than the United States. And that divide between the Atlanticist Anglosphere, the United States and Britain, and the European mainland seems to be becoming more cemented. The European mainland, we've seen this before. You know, when I was in Iran, there is only one type of foreign car that you can get in Iran. Little known fact. There's only one type of foreign car that you can drive in Iran. What is it? It's a BMW. It's a BMW, a German car. And the price is inflated 800% due to the sanctions. But you can drive a German car in Iran. The outlets in Iran are the same as the outlets in Germany. It is the same electrical outlet system. When I was in Venezuela, I noticed that there are a lot of German products in Venezuela. And you'll notice that, in Russia, there are a lot of German products. And now there's the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And it seems like the gap between the European mainland, which does include Western imperialist countries like France and Germany and Belgium and, Luxembourg and where else? Italy, Spain. The gap between the European mainland and the Anglosphere and the Atlanticist powers of the United States and Britain, not familiar, can't comment on that. It seems like the gap between them is getting bigger. It's getting bigger. Now, that is my overall analysis of the AUKUS deal and the fallout. It's not simply about submarine profits. That's a big part of it. But the fact that France has recalled its ambassadors, this is pretty big. And the fact that something that was said in Joe Biden's remarks today, irked the French. Now, we don't know if it was something like maybe he promised he was going to say something and then didn't say it. Maybe it was that he did. In his speech, Joe Biden said we always have the back of all of our allies, and maybe they thought that was just a snub, like he should have commented directly on it, or he should have apologized, or not sure what happened, but something that Joe Biden said today, abolish private property, something that Joe Biden said today irked the French. So the French foreign minister, not president, will be speaking. And this will actually be the first time since 2005. 2005 that we won't have the French president speak to the UN General Assembly. American dollar is no longer the currency. US dollar. Now, what's also important to note is that China and China's President Xi Jinping did address the UN General Assembly, and he gave a pre-recorded message. And the pre-recorded message was mainly about the need to fight COVID-19, the need to oppose climate change, etc. But he did say that China will never bully other nations, and that China is not an imperialist power. Very interesting stuff. All right, DPRK. No taxes. All right. Least favorite recent films. And the remarks that we heard from President Xi Jinping in his pre-recorded message were pretty good. They were, it wasn't like a fiery anti-imperialist speech. It was just a statement about the hope for the Belt and Road, the need for infrastructure and economic development. Stories of individuals who went from leftist to right. All right. left to right versus right to left. All right. So I wanted to remark on that, on the situation at the UN. And I really do think that we should appreciate Biden while he lasts. I mean, I didn't vote for Biden. I'm not going to vote for his reelection if he runs again. But I have a feeling that as bad as Biden is, we're simply biding our time, pun intended. We're simply biding our time. He's a placeholder. Joe Biden is a placeholder. He is there to calm the country down and get us out of the pandemic. Once the pandemic is over, once things are considered to be stable in the country, something a lot scarier than Joe Biden is going to come along. Biden is a placeholder. He is there to calm everybody down and get us over the pandemic. That is what I think is going on with Joe Biden. And, we should try to make the most of the time that we're in. We should try to make the most of the moment, because things could get a lot more dangerous very, very quickly. Right? Kamala Harris, I am convinced, and I said this in my recent interview with Sabi Sobs of Fred Hampton Leftists. Check it out if you haven't seen it. I am convinced that Joe Biden is there to get Kamala Harris into the presidency. Right? This is my book on Kamala Harris and the future of America. And I am convinced that Joe Biden will not do a second term, that Kamala Harris will replace him. He will step down before his term is over, or he won't run again, and Kamala Harris will be the Democratic Party nominee, may even be sworn in as president. We shall see. And Kamala Harris represents some very, very different stuff. They're trying to keep her out of the spotlight right now. Every so often she does something. They let her give a speech on 9/11, etc. But I am convinced that, Joe Biden is the distraction. He's there to calm us down, to get us ready while they prepare to sink the knife in, which is Kamala Harris. That's what I think is going on. But we shall see. I mean, we really shall see. Now, I have compared endlessly the Biden presidency to Jimmy Carter and the Eastern establishment. And I've talked about how Brzezinski, was very much the mastermind behind the Carter presidency, and that Jimmy Carter, as president of the United States, he really, despite having this friendly old man image, started a lot of very, very bad things, right? He started a lot of very, very bad things. Jimmy Carter started the covert war against Nicaragua. He started the covert war in Afghanistan. He started the U.S. government. I mean, he didn't start, but he escalated U.S. manipulation of communists and the Euro-communist split, where the communist parties of Western Europe cut ties with the Soviet Union. He furthermore, he was able to engineer a situation where Libya was not supporting the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, and Libya was on the wrong side. Jimmy Carter was able to do quite a bit. And neoliberal economics really started with Jimmy Carter. When the U.S. economy got bad, in 78, you had an economic downturn. Jimmy Carter put Paul Volcker in charge of the U.S. economy. It was the Carter administration that overturned the laws around the around the lending of money, and introduced all the predatory lending and such that we have seen. Jimmy Carter sent the FBI to go after the members of Congress that were tied to labor unions. They went after, it was called Abscam, the infamous Abscam. If you've ever seen the movie American Hustle, it's a fictionalized account of that, but it's it's basically it was the FBI entrapping pro-labor Democrats. Jimmy Carter was a lot of bad things. He started a lot of negative trends. It just so happened that he carried out a lot of these negative trends in a very managerial way. He was with that slow growth Eastern establishment. He was with, the Rockefellers primarily, the Rockefellers who set up the Trilateral Commission. Almost every member of the Carter administration was from the Trilateral Commission. Market socialism. All right. Market socialism. Command. I think Dem Party has lost voters and won't win. Dems lost voters won't win. And that Eastern establishment, their perspective is that growth is bad, that economic growth is a threat to Mother Nature, that we need to slow down and we need to transition to a post-industrial society in the United States. That's the Eastern establishment. Meanwhile, there is the military-industrial complex, and there are a lot of small business owners who believe in complete deregulation and have kind of a libertarian perspective, but they believe in economic growth. And it's a question of, they all seem to agree that working people need to have less. The question is, does the whole country have less, or does just the working class have less? Are the capitalists allowed to accumulate huge amounts of wealth at the expense while driving working people's living standards down? Or does everyone just start to get used to less so that the monopolists can stay on top? And that seems to be the view. And the Carter administration was very much about transitioning to a post-industrial United States, reducing the living standard of the United States, and kind of carrying out policies of social engineering. Whereas the Reagan folks, they were all about, it's morning in America, cut government spending, increase the military budget to feed the military-industrial complex, deregulate. They were all about growth, growth for the lower levels of capital. And this is the divide between the lower levels and higher levels of capital. In the United States, the higher levels of capital, they tend to be the ones who very much, believe in social liberalism. They're more friendly to labor unions and they want more of a welfare state, but they are opposed to growth. They want to stabilize and slow things down. Whereas the lower level capitalists who don't have as much wealth, they want complete deregulation so they can get a boom and make lots of money. And that is the divide in the ruling class. You have the slow growth, managerial Eastern establishment, and you have the I don't know what you want to call them, the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie, the cowboys. That's the book, The Yankee and Cowboy War. The new money, some people call them the new money. And those folks just want to make money, and they resent the social engineering tendencies of the higher levels of capital. That's the division that we've got in the U.S. ruling class. And right now, Biden very much seems to represent the higher levels of capital. Trump was an insurgent, an insurgency against them, basically. It was an uprising by many lower levels of capital, most specifically the fracking companies, against the Obama administration and against the Eastern establishment. And now, in light of the pandemic and Trump's mismanaging of it, and it now appears that the handling of the economy is back into the hands of the Eastern establishment. And Biden is very much trying to stabilize things. But while Biden is stabilizing things, the American deep state is hard at work. Right? Jimmy Carter talked the same way. It was the same conciliatory, boring, not saying anything, appearing to hear the concerns of the world, appearing to hear the concerns of activists in the United States, but boring, but not really getting anyone excited about anything, not really doing very much. That's Biden. But you have to remember, while Biden is doing that, the intelligence apparatus is working overtime. And what's interesting is that generally the Eastern establishment favors better relations with Europe. And the fact that this fight with France is happening, it shows that a lot of things are at this point beyond their control. Trump tried to stop Nord Stream 2. Obama tried to stop Nord Stream 2, but Nord Stream 2 happened. And when Obama got into office, he very much was trying to repair the relationship with Europe that had been damaged by Bush. We can go back even further. Do folks remember that when the USA invaded Iraq, invaded the country of Iraq, overthrew the Iraqi government, what was one country that opposed it? That was the French government of Jacques Chirac, right? Jacques Chirac, the French president, got up and opposed the invasion of Iraq. And so I remember all across the United States, we were supposed to hate France, right? And we were supposed to hate France. Freedom fries, right? It wasn't French fries, it was freedom fries in the congressional cafeteria. And the French were a bunch of, I think they called them, there was a member of Congress that called them cheese-eating surrender monkeys. And there was all this right-wing chest beating about how the French lose wars, and we rescued the French in World War I and World War II, and they've never helped us ever. And there was all this anti-France chest beating. And then you'll recall that in 2004, the year that George W. Bush was reelected president, Michael Moore made a film attacking George W. Bush called Fahrenheit 9/11. And the Palme d'Or, the highest award, was given to that film at the very famous Cannes Film Festival. And there was like a 10-hour standing ovation or something ridiculous. Like all of the French government and French society was basically bankrolling and promoting Michael Moore to make this anti-George W. Bush film. So then, fast forward to 2008, Barack Obama, when he's running for president of the United States, in the middle of his presidential campaign, he gets on a plane and he goes to Berlin. Do you remember this? Barack Obama gave a campaign speech in Berlin. He gave a campaign speech in Berlin when he's running for president of the United States. And thousands of Berliners watched Obama. And he came here, look, I'm going to repair our relationship with Europe. My predecessor, he wasn't too nice to you guys. But I, Barack Obama, am going to make things better. I like Europe. I like Paris. My name is Barack Obama. That's not a typical American name. I went to school in Indonesia. My mother was a college professor, and so I, Barack Obama, am gonna make things better with Europe. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm Barack Obama. And Barack Obama, right, he was supposed to repair the U.S. relationship with Europe. And he tried. He very much tried. And that was a big focus of the Obama presidency. And part of that was mobilizing Europe against Russia. And we started to see problems, right? The Germans, when the USA put sanctions on Russia. In 2014, for those of you, let me review. 2014, the country of Ukraine had an elected president named Yanukovych. And Yanukovych, Michael Moore films. Yanukovych was the elected leader. There's a lot of corruption in Ukraine and such. I mean, we're not going to deny that. It wasn't a paradise or anything under Yanukovych. There were big problems. However, Yanukovych was the president. He was friendly to Russia. And there was this protest movement against Yanukovych demanding that Ukraine join the European Union. And it was called Euromaidan because it was in Maidan Square. And this protest movement was paid for by the U.S. government. And it was really blatant to the point that, the U.S. ambassador was, handing out candy to the protesters and taking selfies with them. And it was really ridiculous. And a big part of the Euromaidan protests were these folks that are part of the far right of Ukraine, neo-Nazis, ultra-nationalists, people who think Hitler was right in World War II. And that's a big part of the West Ukrainian political system, right? In East Ukraine, you have a lot of people that like the Soviet Union. The Communist Party is very popular in East Ukraine. So is another party called the Party of Regions. However, in West Ukraine, there's a lot of people that say that, basically Ukraine has had a lot of problems since the fall of the Soviet Union. The question is, why the problems? A lot of the people in East Ukraine say the problems started when the Soviet Union fell. A lot of people in West Ukraine say the problems all started because of the Soviet Union, right? Is Ukraine having problems because of the Soviet Union, or is Ukraine having problems because it got rid of the Soviet Union? If you're in West Ukraine, you think they have problems because of the Soviet Union. If you're in East Ukraine, I'm generalizing, of course, do you think that they had problems because they lost the Soviet Union? Many people in East Ukraine, and the majority of people in Ukraine overall, speak Russian as their language in their household. And so you have that situation in Ukraine. And the Euromaidan and the ultranationalists overthrew the government. Illegally, they stormed into the government buildings. They unfurled a U.S. Confederate flag, as well as the symbol of the Ku Klux Klan, the Celtic Cross. They were sig heiling, and the Ukrainian far right that admire Stepan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator, they seized control of the government in Kiev. So in response to that, there was the regions in the east that have broken away, and they declared autonomy, and they said, no, you're not going to outlaw the speaking of Russian in our regions, and you're not going to tear down the World War II memorials, and we're not going to, and that was the situation. Crimea voted to separate and join with Russia. All of that happened. So, of course, the United States uses that as an excuse to put all kinds of sanctions on Russia. Who suffered economically as a result of that? Well, obviously Russia, but who else? The Germans. The Germans suffered horrendously, right? In Germany, there are big ports. There's a lot of dock workers in Germany. There's a lot of ports in Germany that have products delivered to them that are intended to go to Russia, right? That they, the ports, they bring those products in there. The German dock workers unload them, and then they are shipped to Russia. Well, the sanctions made it so that was not happening. A lot of the products that were intended to be exported to Russia could not be unloaded in those German ports anymore, and a lot of German dock workers lost their jobs. The German economy significantly suffered as a result of the sanctions put on Russia, and then we had the whole Nord Stream 2 situation where, again, Germany, are we going to buy natural gas from right over the border in Russia? Are we going to buy natural gas from all the way in the United States? And the Germans said, well, this is pretty much a no-brainer, as they say. We're going to buy natural gas from Russia. And they built this pipeline, the Nord Stream 2. And Barack Obama said, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't buy natural gas from Russia. Can't do that. And Donald Trump came in and he said, you cannot do that. You cannot buy natural gas from Russia. You have to buy it from American companies. We're going to have energy dominance. And the Germans said, nope, no, I think we're going to build Nord Stream 2. And despite all the bluster and chest from the United States, the Germans have proceeded. War on terror / war on socialism. The Germans have actually named, have gone ahead with it. And Nord Stream 2 is up. Donald Trump and the Trump administration imposed sanctions, or at least attempted to impose sanctions on German companies that were cooperating with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They did everything they could to kill the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Didn't work. And now it seems that despite the fact that the Biden wing of American politics tends to be more sympathetic to the European mainland, it seems like we're now back in freedom fries territory. We're back in freedom fries territory at this point, which is wild. It is wild that we're back in freedom fries territory with France and the United States at diplomatic odds. What's also interesting, to top all of this off, what's also interesting about this, if you think about it, is the fact that Britain is not part of the European Union anymore. Remember Brexit? Britain is no longer part of the European Union. And Britain, being a major country, a major economic power, was a very, very, very big part of the pro-US axis within the European Union. Britain pulled the European Union closer to the United States. Britain is not in the European Union anymore, and many in the EU resent the British for leaving. And furthermore, the British no longer have a vote. They no longer have the ability to influence EU decisions as much as they once did. So that creates a situation where there's going to be more distance from the European Union countries and the United States, because Britain's not there to pull the rest of the EU along. And many European Union countries and the chief of the European Union is speaking up in support of France and saying the USA mistreated France, calling out the United States. This could all get very, very, very interesting, folks. Again, right? And I've said this before, and I will say this again. You know, in the movie Reds, it's a movie starring Warren Beatty. There's a line in it that I don't know if it's an actual quote from John Reed, but they're talking about World War One, and he says the British and the French and the Americans own the world, and the Germans and the Austrians just want a piece of it. And that's basically what World War One was, right? World War One was the British had been the first major imperialist power in terms of imperialist economics. They were the first economic imperialist power with their free trade, Adam Smith, globalization, economics, right? Neoliberalism, if you want to call it that, wasn't neo back then, classical economics, etc. They were the first. They were spreading the free market all over the world, colonizing the world. They were the first major economic imperialist. Spain colonized a lot of places, but that was before, the economics of imperialism as they emerged in the 1800s. So the British were the first major imperialist power in the Leninist sense. The Americans caught up right behind them. French caught up right behind them. The Germans were very late, very, very late in becoming imperialists. The German nation state wasn't formed, for a long time. And the German bourgeoisie was always very, very, very weak in comparison. That's why the German Marxist Party, the German Social Democratic Party was so huge, and the German labor movement was so powerful because the bourgeoisie of Germany was very, very weak in comparison. And the Austrians, they were also very weak. And the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, very, very weak. So you had a situation where the French imperialists, the British imperialists, and the American imperialists had the upper hand. And the German imperialists and the Austrian imperialists, basically, they wanted to be imperialists also. They had colonies in Africa. They had parts of China that they had seized. They committed horrendous crimes. Don't deny it. I mean, no one denies that they were just as vicious and murderous. Some even argue that they were more vicious and murderous, right? Some people argue that an up-and-coming imperialist power can be more vicious because it is more competitive, right? And that because the Germans were up and coming and competing with the British and the Americans and the French that had the upper hand, German imperialism was more militaristic. For example, the reason we have public schools in this country is because of the Kaiser. Did you know that? It's because of the Kaiser that we have public schools in this country, right? And that was because the Kaiser, he was very much all about, the fact that he wanted to build an empire, a German empire, and German imperialism to dominate the world. So he instituted public education. So all the kids would be marching in the school, and we get military training, and we get military discipline, so they would be good soldiers. And, all that, we associate, there's this stereotype of the German strictness and the German discipline. Well, that largely comes from the Kaiser, and that was because of the fact that Germany and Austria were way behind. They were way behind the British, the French, and the Americans. Now, what's also interesting is that the Germans and the Austrians were much more socially liberal. And this is where it gets interesting, right? The British Empire, it's the Victorian Empire, right? Queen Victoria. The British imperialists were very much into sexual repression. They were very much into the belief that one had to restrain one's impulses, discipline, puritanical attitudes, etc. Well, Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis and nudism and a lot of the liberal, socially liberal and sexually liberal, stuff that emerged during like the early 1900s, right? In 1901, you have Sigmund Freud publishing his interpretation of dreams. That was very, very much the German rebuttal to the British. The British were putting out, control your impulses, put curtains over the legs of the piano. Well, the Germans were saying, oh, sexual repression is bad. There was a stage play in Germany and Austria that was very popular. It was called Spring Awakening, and it was all about how sexual repression damages people psychologically and causes mental illness, right? That that the Germans and the Austrians were sexually liberal in response to the social conservatism of the British and the Americans. So it's complicated, right? The Germans were much more authoritarian, far more authoritarian, militarist, but they were also much more sexually liberal, the Austrians, etc. You have plays opposing sexual repression. You have the beginning of the LGBT rights movement, right? There were gay bars in Germany, and there were drag shows. Gay people from all over Europe would move to Berlin because that was one place where gay people were kind of tolerated. The gay people were kind of tolerated in Germany. So it's a very strange development. But World War I was largely the Germans trying to push back against the British, the Americans, and the French and demand their chunk of the world. And they lost. They lost. The German government collapsed. There was a workers' uprising at the end of World War I, but the Social Democrats sold it out. Germany was stripped of all its colonies, lost all of its colonies. And the rise of the Nazis, after about 10 years of instability, or not 10 years, more like, how long was it? I would say almost, 10 or 15 years. Almost after a period of instability in Germany, after it had been stripped of its colonies, Holomer shocked, and the Krupp family and the Tysons seized control of the German government. They brutally crushed the communist workers' movement, and they also, canceled all their debts to American banks and ripped up the Treaty of Versailles and tried to become an imperialist power again. And that was largely what Nazi Germany was. It was German imperialism that had been stripped of its colonies, re-seizing control of the government, right? Crushing the threat of communist revolution, and also starting to fight the British and the Americans again. And they lost again, right? The Germans also lost World War II. Now, what's interesting is Holomer Schacht, who was the Nazi economist, he was the banker, he was the wealthy banker who basically made Hitler happen. He was acquitted at the Nuremberg trials. He was not sent to prison after the war. Holomer Schacht, for the rest of his life, he continued to be an economist in Britain. And Holomer Schacht pushed the idea that the future of Germany economically was separate from Britain and the United States. And that really was what World War I and World War II were really all about. And that underlying division, that feeling that the European mainland and the Atlanticist Anglosphere are not tied together, that's a reality that probably keeps the British imperialists awake at night. Cecil Rhodes probably had nightmares about this, right? The British royal family probably have nightmares about this. At the end of the day, it's just a fact. The Germans, the French, the Belgians, the Austrians, the Italians, the Spaniards are a lot more like the Russians and the Chinese than they are like the British and the Americans. Nobody wants to admit that. It's very well covered up. There's all kinds of American and British culture all over the world. But at the end of the day, the way the countries of the European mainland have developed and the way Britain and the United States have developed are completely different. They're completely different. The British Empire emerged as what it is by dominating the global trade routes. The United States is a settler country that basically has joined and become, like the British, dominating the trade routes. The economic system of the Americans and the British is very much imperialism and Atlanticism. Whereas, as much as the French and the Germans and others have tried to do that, they are much more in touch with their past prior to imperialism. As cultures and as societies, there is a lot more solidarity. There is a lot more, comradeship. There is a more collective vision. They are a lot less individualist in their outlook. Culturally speaking, they have some commonality with Russians, with Chinese folks, with people in the Muslim world. And that's hard. You wouldn't think that, right? And it's hard to notice it. But that's a reality. And it's something that the British have known about for a long time, that Europe isn't theirs. All right? At the end of the day, the European mainland does not belong to the British. And the Belt and Road Initiative is something that many people on the European mainland are not opposed to. Russia, at the end of the day, fighting with Russia does not benefit folks on the European mainland. And they know this. And they know this in their guts. And that's what's underlying all of this. At the end of the day, the Europeans, they realize that fighting with Russia, fighting with China doesn't benefit them. It benefits the British. It benefits the United States. And that knowledge is underlying all of these diplomatic disputes. And as much as Joe Biden is from the Democratic Party that tries to smooth over these disagreements, that panders to Europe, that tried to repair the damage of freedom fries and the Bushes, I'm telling you, this is underlying, this is still a reality. This is still a factor. And so we're seeing this play out at the UN with Joe Biden canceling his speech. We're seeing this, with the AUKUS deal, not Joe Biden, Macron canceling his speech with the AUKUS deal. We shall see what happens next. But I will never forget how the only car that was not made in Iran that I saw people driving was a BMW. And how when I went to Venezuela, all the plugs had German outlets. Just telling you folks, the imperialist camp is not fully unified. Never has been. There are contradictions among the imperialists. And that, in the lead up to World War I, Karl Kautsky had this theory of ultra-imperialism. He argued that the imperialists were all unified, right? The inter-imperialist rivalries were over. He was wrong. He was absolutely wrong about that. Now, I would argue that the ultra-rich faction, the Eastern establishment, that they are not particularly loyal to states as they once were, and that neoliberalism economically, it used to be that there was much more state loyalty. There were German imperialists, there were British imperialists, there were French imperialists, and it's not so much like that. There are multinational alliances among different factions of the ruling class, but the loyalty of imperialists to their particular state and the use of the state to serve a particular imperialist power, that's no longer a situation. So there are changes, absolutely. But we are entering a period of capitalism in decay. We're entering a long-term economic crisis spawned by overproduction. And as a result, there are going to be contradictions among the imperialists. And Joe Biden is an attempt to manage the contradictions. Kamala Harris is waiting in the wings. Donald Trump and his faction are anxious to get back into power. Russia and China are moving ahead, and we shall see where this all goes next. So that's my kind of summation of these events. And now we can do our roll call, and then I'll start answering Super Chat questions. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. John in Houston. Lucha in Mississippi. NYC, Lanier. Sam in Chicago. Jesus, Springfield. Chaya in Montreal. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Emma from Ontario, Canada. Houston, Texas. Enoch, Australia. Jeff in Studio City. Kieran from San Diego. Ramiro and Ophelia in LA. Shout out to you all. Great folks. Go check out Ramiro's documentaries about Nicaragua. Ramiro's great. I can't wait to get his speech up from the California conference. Good stuff, folks. Temple City, California. Nate in Chicago. Bobby in Austin. Ryan in Oakland. Nate Pano in Sydney, Australia. James Graham in Clydebank. Caden and Chloe from Utah, Mississippi. George of Portland, Oregon. Detroit, Austin, Texas. Alex, Tulare, California. David in China. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Joe Mary. Tommy in Dublin. Northern California. Carmen in Reading, Pennsylvania. Jorge in Virginia. Ben in Suffolk County. Shout out to you, Ben. Los Angeles. Don D in New York City. Shout out to you, Don D. Good friend. Great guy. San Miguel and Mexico, Southwest Florida, Mo in Toronto, Olympia Logic, shout out to you, Olympia, Ben in Chicago, Grand Junction, Colorado, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, China, Jason in Georgia, Maximilian in Fairfax, Elsa in Irvine, Danny from Illinois, Boston, Massachusetts, Toronto, Ontario, St. David's, Bermuda, Kansas City, Missouri, the Paris of the Plains, Alice in Chicago, Patrick in Los Angeles, On the Edge, Maine, Texas, Vinicius from Brazil, Dario with Tamara in his heart from Brooklyn, Tom from Minneapolis, PG County, Maryland. Oh, well, don't go to R-rated county. Mohsen from Iran, Chris in Philly, Drew from Louisiana, Joe Gale in Nassau County. Shout out to you, Joe Gale. Shout out to you, Kent in Edmonton, Alberta, St. George, Utah, Ryan Preston. Shout out to you, Phil in Miami, Florida, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Arturo from Alaska, Brazil, Zach in Seattle, St. Louis, Carla in Los Angeles, Dylan in California. Shout out to you, Adam from Shanghai, Naples, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Kansas City, Missouri, Yugoslavia, Nathaniel in Washington. There you go. There you go, folks. All right. Great time to see you all. Great time. Good stuff happening. All right. Thoughts on constructivist approaches to education in U.S. schools. Paulo Freire, liberal ideology. All right. Well, I know about Paulo Freire. I can talk about that a little bit. Paulo Freire. All righty. All right. So there we go. All right. Chinese real estate market crash. Well, I've often emphasized and quoted from President Xi Jinping, who says housing is for people to live in. Housing is for living in, not for speculation. Now, I'm going to obviously give you all a more detailed answer about that Chinese real estate market crash after I have done some thorough research. But at the end of the day, this is the problem of capitalism. And I had that conversation last night where we talked about gentrification and real estate speculation. So, yes, and at the end of the day, look, they've been saying the Chinese economy is going to crash and burn for so long. The great crash of China, it hasn't happened yet. 2015, the Chinese stock market went down, and it went down, and it went down, and it went down. And they told us, oh my God, this is the end. And a week later, the Chinese stock market was right back up. And why? Because the Chinese Communist Party threatened to arrest anyone caught short selling. And on top of that, they halted the trading by state-run enterprises, and it was right back up. I talk about it in City Builders and Vandals. I have a whole section about the Chinese situation in 2015. And actually, I will just read that section here very quickly. I will just read you the data of what happened, the actual numbers, so you can hear it. This is what you need to understand the next time they're telling you China's gonna crash, because it's not going to crash. Are you ready? Are you ready? All right. A great example of this is from page 70 of your manuals, We Are City Builders. A great example of the non-capitalist nature of the Chinese economy is the results of the stock market crash on July 8th and 9th of 2015. During these events, the Chinese stock market dropped by roughly 30%. Over 1,400 companies filed for a trading halt. The result of a similar drop on the New York Stock Exchange would be catastrophic. Food would stop being delivered. Society would come to a screeching halt. A 30% drop on the U.S. stock market would most likely result in riots in the streets, as 55% of the U.S. public is directly tied to Wall Street. Nothing even close to this happened in China. China's stock market is not the center of the economy. The bulk of China's economic activity is centered around the government and its apparatus of state-owned banks and industries. The stock market functions simply as a kind of elite gambling casino for millionaires and billionaires, and a mechanism for bringing in foreign capital. Less than 6% of the Chinese population is in any way tied to the stock market. The overwhelming majority of Chinese people and the Chinese economy is fully insulated from market turbulence. In 2015, after the Shanghai stock market crashed on July 8th and 9th, the government swept in with anti-selling measures to prevent a panic on the market. The Communist Party announced that anyone caught short selling would be arrested. All major shareholders were barred from selling stock for 6 months. The state-owned enterprises followed government direction and were carefully managed in their activities. As a result of the Communist Party stepping in and taking control, the Chinese stock market was soon speeding ahead with numbers rising. This occurred just a week after the collapse that Western media declared to be the long-predicted doomsday of the Chinese economy. The market exists simply to enhance the state's ability to expand the economy because the state is in control. The boom-bust cycle described by Marx in his analysis of capitalism is not a threat to China's growth. In China, the Communist Party is in command. Profits are not. Explaining the nature of the Communist Party's achievements, Deng Xiaoping wrote, "China always used to be a heap of loose sand. But when our party came to power and rallied the whole country around it, the disunity resulting from the partitioning of the country by various forces was brought to an end. So long as the party exercises correct leadership, it can rally not only its whole membership, but the whole nation to accomplish any mighty undertaking." That's important to understand the Chinese economy. Now, before I get to the next question, I want to let folks know that the next section of the Saxton Lectures is up. Saxton Lecture 2.1, The Roots of the Revolutionary Intelligentsia, is up. So you should go check that out. And if you haven't watched the Saxton Lectures, now would be a great time to watch them. And I already own the domain of saxtonlectures.com. I own the domain of saxtonlectures.com. And we need an all-out campaign to promote the Saxton Lectures. There is a playlist of the Saxton Lectures on the YouTube channel. Hundreds of people have already watched the playlist as a playlist, and thousands of people have watched the lectures so far. And there are 3 more installments coming along. There are 3 more classes from the Saxton Lectures that are going up. But I need you all to promote them and find creative ways to do it, right? We have been banned from communism Reddit. We've been banned from various communist Facebook groups. But there have got to be ways that we can maneuver around these bans. There's got to be ways we can get people to watch the Saxton Lectures. Most of them have about 2,000 views at this point. It should be way more than that. And I know we all agree about that, right? No one explains Marxism the way we do, right? We put it very, very clearly. And we are the city-building tendency. We are a unique understanding and interpretation of this that is in line with the global anti-imperialist movement and is aiming to get out of the movement and to the masses. We have a unique understanding that will save socialism so that socialism can save America. Right, contemporary art, nihilistic. All right. We have that view. And so it's important. It is very, very important that we promote the Saxton Lectures. I've got a website. We're putting together an actual website, and also, it's not just me talking on there. The discussion is really gold, right? I mean, the discussion of the latest one that just went up is about the definition of the lumpen proletariat, and that's up there, and we talk about that, and the conversations that surrounded the Saxton Lectures are really, really great. So I need your help to promote them. The other thing is, we did put out our compilation, Jesus is a Socialist. It's available now. Keaton Mansfield and myself edited a very small book called Jesus is a Socialist. It's got quotes from the Bible, quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's got an essays from various American socialist leaders. I wrote the conclusion. Keaton wrote the introduction. And the John Brown volunteers are going to be distributing it on the street as soon as our books come. They're going to be distributing it at churches throughout the New York City area. They will be distributing this book, Jesus is a Socialist. So if you want to get a copy of it, if you'd like to order it in bulk, just contact me and I will arrange for you to get copies of it because we need this book to get everywhere. We need to understand, people to understand that there is no contradiction between following the teachings of Jesus Christ and believing in socialism. And in fact, they walk hand in hand. And that book is very small and handheld and meant for mass distribution. So if you would like a copy of it, just go to Amazon and order one. If you'd like to distribute it, send me an email. I'll get you a bulk rate where you can get it very cheaply. We need to get this book into so many people's hands. We need to challenge, because it's really horrifying to see how much these churches promote neoliberal economics. I mean, and so we need to push back against this, right? So there you go. Send me an email if you want to order it in bulk. If you want to just go order a copy right now, get on the website. Can I get a Jesus book on the CPI website? I don't think we have uploaded it to the website yet, but you can get it on Amazon.com, or you can email me and I can ship one to you. We can do PayPal or whatever. I can have them shipped to you. Alrighty. So there you go. Just send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com. There you go. All right. The next question. What do I think of Guzman, or, his party name was Presidente Gonzalo. I'm not a big fan of his. I have made it a rule to never celebrate the death of another person. I have made that a rule. Never celebrate the death of another person. That is not moral behavior, right? You don't ever jump up and down and celebrate that someone died, no matter how awful the person was. You never do that. And I feel like that is just a rule that I live by. And so, obviously, I give condolences to the man's family. But he wasn't a good guy. I'm sorry. And I mean, the Shining Path has done so much damage to the Marxist movement in Peru. The Shining Path, instead of, uniting the communist movement, they bombed the Chinese embassy. They assassinated and murdered, members of the legitimate Communist Party of Peru. They assassinated and murdered members of other rebel groups that were fighting for the Peruvian peasantry. Right? Ruling class not loyal to the state. All right, we can talk about that. Ruling. All right. Kennedys went to war. I just got to tell you that the Shining Path was not good, right? They were Maoists, I guess, very anti-China, very anti-Cuba, very anti-Soviet, very opposed to the leaders of the labor unions of Peru, using violence, very bloodthirsty, mass executions. It was kind of a crazed extremist cult. And because of the horrendous things the Shining Path did, communism had a very bad name among the Peruvian people. They set the stage for the Fujimori dictatorship because people were terrified of them. That laid the basis for Fujimori to establish an authoritarian regime that committed genocide against the peasantry. And Fujimori was able to establish austerity, right? By having that insurgency and having people so terrified of the Shining Path, that made a lot of the population that wouldn't have supported Fujimori's military regime, they supported it on the basis of, well, at least he's keeping us safe from the Shining Path. I mean, it was really awful. And one of the main targets of the Shining Path was other communists, right? If you were a communist who admired Fidel Castro, if you were a communist who built labor unions and factories rather than working in the countryside, they said you were a revisionist and they would cut your head off and mutilate your body. They were not good folks. That doesn't mean obviously that I support the crimes committed by the government in response to them. But that was again, the way to fight neoliberalism that has been successful in Latin America has been by building popular fronts and coalitions, right? It's been by building coalitions and united fronts. And if you look at what Venezuela has accomplished, look at what Venezuela has accomplished. Look at what Bolivia has accomplished, wiping out illiteracy, vast economic expansion. Look at what Nicaragua has accomplished. And look at what's gone on in Peru since the Shining Path. What good came out of the Shining Path? A lot of big pile of dead bodies, a brutal authoritarian military regime, people hating communism, people being dead, austerity. What good came out of what Guzman did? I will quote a communist revolutionary from 2,000 years ago. Forgive me if this is offensive or if this is not something you want to hear. I know that not everyone appreciates it, but I will quote Jesus of Nazareth and say, "Know them by their fruits. You shall know them by their fruits." What did Stalin accomplish? Stalin raised the Soviet Union up from poverty, defeated the Nazis, found Russia with ox-drawn plowshares and left it with atomic piles. Stalin, the Soviet Union under Stalin's leadership became an industrial superpower, wiped out illiteracy. What did Mao accomplish? He took one of the poorest countries in the world and started it on the path to becoming the second largest economy in the world. Industrialization, electricity, what did Fidel Castro accomplish? Look at Cuba. What did William Z. Foster accomplish? Look at the labor movement. Look at the Black freedom struggle. What did the Shining Path accomplish? What did they accomplish? What good came out of what the Shining Path did? I don't see anything. Can you think of anything good? Occasionally there are rare instances where some of these crazy ultra-leftist groups will do crazy ultra-leftist stuff and something good might come out of it, right? The one example that some people point to is that, that this crazy terrorist group called the Symbionese Liberation Army. They kidnapped Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst, the daughter of this wealthy family. They kidnapped her. And then they demanded that her family give a bunch of free food to African Americans in San Francisco. And so the Hearst family gave like $2 million of free food away to black people in San Francisco. What happened was that the media went into overdrive, saying that anyone who got that food was a bad person. If you went and got food from, the Hearst family was giving out, then you were a bad person because that was, this person had been kidnapped, and there was all of this shaming and all of this. Well, then, regardless of the fact that it was considered to be an immoral thing, thousands of people turned out to get that free food. And that revealed the fact that even in the early 70s in the United States, when we were supposedly had a booming economy before deindustrialization, before the 80s, even then, there were so many people that were hungry that even though the media was shaming them and saying it was a bad thing to do, thousands of low-income African-American folks lined up to get that food. Well, that was, proof. That was visual proof that there were crowds of thousands of people to get free food at a time when they were being told not to, and the media had to cover it. That was an accomplishment. Now, obviously, I don't condone all the crazy things the Symbionese Liberation Army did, and that doesn't justify what they did, but that was like one good thing you could say that came out of all the crazy things the Symbionese Liberation Army did. They did one, people saw and were forced to confront the fact that there were a lot of African-American folks in Oakland and in San Francisco who were deeply poor. Okay, that's like one good thing. What good ever came out of what the Shining Path did? I know that the indigenous folks in the rural areas of Peru are horrendously oppressed. Their living standards is very low. Their access to basic health care and things is not there, and their conditions are awful. But what United Ireland, what was accomplished? I mean, what did the Shining Path accomplish? What did they accomplish? I hate to say it. So I don't think very positively of them. I consider the Shining Path and the Naxals of India to be an ultra leftist deviation. An ultra leftist deviation. Mao Zedong is one of the most important figures in history, and there are many parties and groups around the world that admire Mao and follow Mao Zedong thought, etc. But the Shining Path, the Naxals in India, not a big fan. Next question. What does abolish private property mean? Karl Marx makes clear that there is a difference, a distinction between personal property and private property. That private property refers to the means of production, centers of economic power. Abolishing private property means that they will no longer be the property of individuals functioning to enrich them with profits, right? You won't have oil wells that are the private property of an oil company. Instead, you'll have oil wells that are public property, or that are maybe they're privately managed, but they're regardless forced to work in the interests of society. They're not functioning according to profits and command. Abolishing private property means getting rid of profits and command. It means getting to an economy that is organized to serve public good and not profits, right? Private property is property that exists to enrich the owner, right? The Kroc family has never even been into most McDonald's, but yet they make profits from all the McDonald's. I'm trying to think of another example. The Walton family has never even walked into most Walmart stores, but yet they make profits from it, because Walmart is their private property. It is their property that they use to enrich themselves. Anything that you personally use for your personal use, your home, your car, your clothing, your food, your shoes, that is not considered private property in the Marxist sense. That's what you call personal property. Private property is property that you use to advance, to make profits from. And abolishing private property means that society controls those things, and they are functioning for the benefit of society. That's what that means. All right. Gotta pour some more water here. All right. Very good. What happens when the US dollar is no longer the currency used around the world? Well, little known fact, the value of a currency goes up based on how many people use it. Did you know that? The reason the US dollar is so important is because it's used in so many different places. You have the petrodollar, where oil is largely traded in the dollar. You have many countries around the world that use the US dollar as their currency. As a result, the more countries that are using dollars, the more valuable the dollar is. The less countries that use a currency, the less value it has, right? That's generally how it works. So if the US dollar falls into less and less use, the value of the dollar will decrease in relation to other currencies. That's how it'll work. The value of the dollar will decrease. The more countries that use the dollar, the more valuable it is. The less countries that use the dollar, the less valuable it is. And I'm sure other currencies, like Chinese currency, like the Chinese currency, will step up, right? So there you go. Claims China's invasion of Taiwan is imminent. All right. All right. All right. Okay. How does the DPRK's economy function with no taxes? The DPRK's economy right now is centered around the military, right? Ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, and even before that to some extent, North Korea is a highly militarized society because Korea is still divided. It's still heavily divided. And so the economy of North Korea is largely centered around the military. As a result of that, people are paid for their job, and taxation is not a thing because, again, you don't have private companies there. Things are centered around the military. You go to work, you do your job, you get your paycheck. The government already owns everything, so why would you get taxed into there's not a private sector. They want to move toward a market system. They want to move toward something like what China has, but they're not there yet. And the economy is centered around the military. You go to work, you do your job, you get paid. and you don't pay taxes out of your paycheck because the government already owns everything. The government's your employer. So it's a different situation. It's almost war communism, right? It's their it's barracks socialism. It's Songun, military first, right? They are very much, locked down and fighting for their lives. I mean, after the fall of the Soviet Union, North Korea lost a lot of people because of the fact they couldn't get oil to run their food system. And, the USA, with its sanctions, has been vicious to North Korea, with thousands of troops in South Korea, just trying to lock them out of the world economy. And as a result of that, North Korea is fighting for its life, and it's a very militarized, authoritarian society. So there you go. All right. Least favorite recent films. I mean, it's funny. My wife and I go to the movies, and we go to one of the movie theaters that's not a bigger chain. And we just see like B movies, and I must say, sometimes we will, my wife, she likes to see kids movies sometimes. A lot of kids movies I could really do without. And honestly, I like older horror movies, like the older ones from like that. I really love Hammer Film Productions, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. But a lot of modern horror films are awful, and they're not really horror films. They're just gore shows. So there you go. All right, left to right versus right to left. Well, this is something I tweeted about, right? So recently, the right-wing anti-abortion movement that I don't agree with, I think abortion should be legal. They had a big event, and it was called the Quitters Ball, and it's all these people who used to work at abortion clinics who quit. Um, they used to work there and they quit, and they're talking all about how bad abortion clinics are, right? And it was a big event that they put on. It was called the Quitters Ball. Now, I obviously don't agree with the right-wing anti-abortion movement, but all these people that were at this big fancy event put on by the anti-abortion movement are people who used to work at an abortion clinic and quit, right? They used to do something that the abortion movement considers to be murder, right? That's their slogan, abortion is murder. And they quit. And they said, I'm not going to do that anymore. They're against abortion. They just had a big banquet for them. Hello? I mean, this is why the right is going to recruit. Because they went from being previously doing something the right disapproved of, and the right didn't cancel them. The right did the opposite. It said, see, you used to be doing something we don't approve of, but you quit and you changed your mind. Now we embrace you. Meanwhile, on the left, not only do we not allow people to do that, right? I mean, you make one mistake for the rest of your life. Axles or Nazguls. You make one mistake, you're canceled. But on top of that, we think half the left. We think half the left are Nazis, right? I mean, Jimmy Dore is called a Nazi. I'm called a Nazi. Everyone's a Nazi, right? If you disagree with the prevailing view, I mean, all these people who've never met me, new upsurge quote, all these people who've never met me, have decided they know all about me. And I guess, despite all these lives and all these videos, all I do is just hate trans people all day, and I'm a Nazbol white supremacist, or, all these people who've never met me because, oh, no, all these people who don't know anything about me, have never watched any of my content, they know all about me because they heard from somebody who's somebody and they're special. And, I mean, it's just, this is how it works, right? If I were to become right-wing, right, I could go to the right wing and say, you know what, I don't agree with Marxism anymore. And they would go, great. And I would make a how I left the left video, and I would be on the right, and they would be fine with that. On the left, oh, no, 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 no. If you don't agree on one thing, you're a Nazi. You're not allowed to leave the right. All we do on the left is condemn and morally shame and dig up dirt on people and attack them. And on the right, people are like, oh, I made a mistake, I changed my view, and they accept them. And if people can't understand how toxic this is, leftism in the United States, the internet, SJWism, I don't know what you want to call it, is so toxic. The right can recruit because people can leave the left and go to the right. And on the left, on the left, you can't leave the right and go to the left. Oh, you're a closet Trump supporter. Oh, you are a neo. I mean, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. So, I mean, these people are the best friends Nazis ever had. Really, they are, right? People leave the left because of them. And even half the left is at each other's throats. I mean, I know so many people who won't go to protests anymore, right? Won't go to protests anymore because they've been so smeared on the internet, or people won't talk to them. I know people that are scared to go to left places. Um, you know, I'm just telling you, right? I mean, the internet left is toxic. Whereas on the right, people change their view. They come over to the right, and the right's like, "Oh, welcome. That's great." I mean, and if people can't comprehend that, I mean, look, redemption, people changing their minds, alliances with people who don't agree with you. You know, I remember years ago. I mean, I'm not that old. I'm only 33, okay? And I remember a time before gay marriage was legal when there would be demonstrations for gay marriage. And often at these demonstrations for gay marriage, there would be a person who would get up and they would say, "You know what? I personally don't agree with being gay, but I think you should be allowed to get married because it's not my business." And people would applaud. And they saw that person as an ally because they were recognizing the right of. Nowadays, if somebody got up and they said, "I personally don't think it's okay to be gay," people would go, "What? Ah!" I mean, it's weird. It's very, very weird. Um, it's very, very weird. It's extremely weird, right? And it's like, there's no alliances that can be made. Everyone's a racist, everyone's a sexist, everyone's a homophobe, and everyone's a Nazi. And if you won't denounce so and so, if you won't denounce so and so, are you friends with so and so? Well, you better denounce them, or I'm going to denounce you. You're fascist, Jason. I mean, it's so toxic, and that's all I can say about it. It's a toxic atmosphere. All right. How is market socialism true socialism? Profits are in command. Profits are not in command in market socialism. Market socialism means market mechanisms are being used. It means that there are private companies and such. But at the end of the day, the state is in command. The state is in command, and it can control those private companies at any time. They may be private companies seeking profit, but there are state industries on top of them. They're being managed by the state, and the state steps in and controls them. It's not the market. It's not profits in command. It's the state in command with markets existing. It seems like those leftists are really just looking for an individualist feeling of moral superiority. Yes, exactly, mass casualty. You've got it, and you've got it. They don't really want to change anything. They just want to feel good about themselves on the internet. Alrighty. And a lot of it is, well, never mind. Anyway, Democrats have lost voters and won't win. I mean, we shall see. I mean, Joe Biden has lost voters, I'll tell you that much. I mean, no one's getting excited about Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden has been a huge disappointment. I mean, things were supposed to get better as soon as we got rid of Trump. Well, I mean, they got slightly better, I guess. People are less afraid. Things are less unstable, I guess, kind of. But there you go. Michael Moore films. It's interesting. Bowling for Columbine is a very good movie. Bowling for Columbine by Michael Moore is a very good film. Sicko, about the healthcare system by Michael Moore, is a very good film. Fahrenheit 9/11 I didn't particularly like. It kind of bored me. Capitalism, a Love Story. Again, my old roommate is actually in it for like 2 seconds. Somebody I used to live with is in it for like half a second. And some people I used to work with politically are in it also. But it loses its energy at some parts. Some parts of it are very good, but it kind of loses its energy at some parts. Um, you know, uh, I will say, Sicko is a very good movie. Um, Sicko was a very good movie. Bowling for Columbine was a great movie. But his latest one, Fahrenheit 11/9, the anti-Trump film, that was 15 different movies. Every different 10-minute section should have been its own movie. I mean, it had no central plot other than Trump is a bad president. Some parts of it were decent about the West Virginia teachers strike and such, and some parts of it were just silly, like the Florida gun kids having their like online rally or whatever, and like doing their online activism, and he filmed it. That was very silly. Um, you know, there was that. I don't know, and some of it just seemed like Trump, like him bragging about his friendship with Trump, and I don't know. I didn't think that was very good. His original, the movie that made him famous, Roger and Me, is very good, and it's also very significant. It's a very significant film. It came out, during the time, of deindustrialization. It came out during the Reagan presidency, and it was a really big deal. Again, there wasn't a left, right? I mean, at that time, it was the '80s, right? The 1970s, '60s new left was done, and to have a pro labor union film that ended with, with like a dig at capitalism. I mean, the last line of that movie is they show a representative of the General Motors company, and he says, you expect that everyone can be provided with employment. That's simply not possible under our free market system, and that's how it ends. So the last line of the film is like capitalism. It's basically hinting that capitalism sucks. That was really powerful. Michael Moore, he got fired, I believe, from The Nation. He was editor of The Nation, and he refused to run propaganda against the Sandinistas of Nicaragua, and that's why he was fired. I think that's pretty cool. And so, and he's made a lot of pro-Cuba statements over the years. He supported the right of the Iraqis to resist U.S. occupation. That was pretty bold. So he goes back and forth. Right now, especially in the last couple of years, he's seemed like just a typical Democrat. But there was a time in his life where he seemed pretty far left. He seemed like a Marxist. Um, you know, um, you know, Trying to think of some examples, but I mean, people in radical groups knew him. I don't know how much I should say, but I know about some friendships that he had over the years. Um, I will say one thing that I've noticed, which is interesting, is that apparently someone tried to blow up his house. Did folks know this? Apparently, some right wing guy found out where he lived and tried to blow up his house. And that may have been the turning point. That seems to be how they get people that are in kind of prominent positions to move to the right and to become just kind of centrists. Is that, and AOC is constantly talking about the right wing trying to kill her and stuff. And I get the idea that, people get to be famous, they get to be in Congress, or they get to be well known filmmakers. And then, the threats start coming from the right, and then they get approached by the FBI, the CIA, and all that. And it's like, we can protect you from the right, but if we're going to protect you from the right wing, you've got to, play ball, and you got to start talking this way. And I think that's how it works. I really do. I think that that's largely how a lot of this stuff works. We will protect you from the right, is how the deep state kind of handles leftist dissidents, right? Is that the right is so crazy and vicious and extreme. There are a lot of right wing militia types who want to kidnap people and want to kill people and want to assassinate people. And they use fear of the right to kind of keep, it's like, well, you can do what the FBI says, you can do what the CIA says, or, maybe you don't get protected from the right. We miss work. Maybe we stop guarding your house that day, or maybe we just drop the ball. I mean, I'm speculating, of course, but it seems like that because fear of the right wing seems to be something that happens. I think George Galloway, former member of parliament, anti-imperialist, socialist, he's been assaulted before by pro-Israel people on the street. I believe he's been assaulted. If you look, believe I saw some news items. He's been attacked, right? And that this is the way that they kind of keep left dissidents under control, because it seems like, yeah, these people get famous, suddenly they're facing all kinds of threats, and then it's like, yeah, what are you going to do there? But yeah, Michael Moore, he's done some good work over the years, but where he's at now, I don't quite approve of. And the thing is, he's not a communist, okay? He's a social democrat. And like his movie, Where to Invade Next, that was a movie he did, Where to Invade Next. That comes across. That film, it's like he's going to different countries and learning from them. Like, what do we have? And he's talking about how school lunches are better in France. And he's talking about different things that countries have done over the years. What can we learn from them? And it's mainly a glorification of European social democratic welfare states. Not acknowledged it. And he basically says the reason they have it is because they protest a lot in those countries. No, no. There's imperialism and there's super profits. And on top of that, the reason we don't have it here is largely because of racism, right? The way that the U.S. working class has been divided in terms of racism prevents the kind of solidarity that you had in France and in Norway and in Sweden and in Germany, right? Here in the United States, when you hear the phrase welfare mother, right? What is a welfare mother? It is a woman with children who receives government benefits. The majority of women with children who receive government benefits are white. But when you hear welfare mother, you think of a black woman. And historically, the term welfare mother has been used to convince white people to oppose the welfare state. Racism. Racism has been very effective. The reason we don't have a strong welfare state in the United States, the reason we don't have national health care, the reason our social programs are very limited is because of racism. Because they've convinced, they've convinced a lot of white people that the only people that get social benefits are black people, and they're the others. They're not like you. They're different. The welfare debate, especially since the rise of the neocons, the 70s really with Nixon, and later with Reagan, the welfare state arguments in the United States have largely been so cased in racism that it's really not even an argument about economics. It's white workers being told, "Do you want some of your tax money to go help those others?" And they go, "No, I don't want it to help those others." Well, in a country like France and Norway and places like that, where they are the same nationality, it's much harder to do that. I mean, divisions exist, certainly religious divisions. There are ethnic divisions. The South doesn't like the North. There's different divisions, but it was harder to play up those differences. And on top of that, the ability to create these welfare states was largely dependent on imperialism. Look, if France hadn't been colonizing the world and French corporations hadn't been making super profits off the rest of the planet, they never would have been able to provide a welfare state. So he's not a communist, and that came across in his film. It was just kind of like, oh, if we protest a lot, if you protest a lot, then governments can be more social democratic. It's like, no, there's other factors, and there's the race question and national oppression, and there's the legacy of imperialism and super profits, and that maybe that's a lot to get into in a film, but it's he's not a communist. I don't think he thinks that. He's a social democrat. He's a pro-labor guy. His background is in the labor movement, so he's anti-capitalist in a sense. Yeah, and I know in previous years of his life, he was more sympathetic to socialist countries, and he remains positive on Cuba and such, but he did oppose the bombing of Libya. I'll give him credit for that. So he's a mixed bag. All right. We should instead of calling it the war on terror, we should call it the war on socialism. Absolutely, right? It was a war to benefit the terrorists, right? The terrorists benefited from the overthrow of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The terrorists benefited from the overthrow of Gaddafi. The terrorists have benefited from efforts to destabilize Syria. Yeah, there you go. Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is a very important educational theorist. I believe he's from Brazil. And he is a Marxist educational theorist, and he argued that the way education is conducted is not effective, and a lot of his writing is about the fact that we need to be educating the working class, and we need to that people's abilities are different based on their life circumstances, that education is often used to train people to be subservient workers, but education should be used to empower people. He's a very widely respected left-wing scholar of education. I think Jonathan Kozol draws heavily from Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is considered one of the main voices of a left-wing critique of education, and he's an important voice in Latin America, right? I mean, he was a revolutionary who focused on education, but he was just a revolutionary writer who was widely respected in South America. Contemporary art, nihilistic. Well, look, this is where it all gets interesting. So it infuriates me, right? So I talk endlessly about how the CIA funded modern art. That's a fact. That is a fact. The CIA promoted the work of Jackson Pollock. The CIA promoted modern art. And you get all these right-wing, or not right-wing, I should say, you get all these left-wing people, these like liberals who go, "You just made that up, that's stupid," or "That means you're a neo-Nazi, that's right-wing." This is a fact. It is a fact, okay? The Congress for Cultural Freedom, the CIA paid for modern art. Why? Because prior to the rise of modern art in the 50s and 60s, the prevailing trend among artists was realism, and more specifically, social realism, and in many cases, socialist realism. If there's anyone watching from Kansas, in your state capital, you have a beautiful painting of John Brown. It is one of the most beautiful paintings ever of John Brown holding his rifle, and it is a socialist painting. If you live in Detroit, you can go to the Detroit Art Institute and see a beautiful painting that that was done in support of the Diego Rivera, done in support of, excuse me, excuse me, in support of the sit-down strikers and the labor movement. Social realism was the trend. During the Great Depression, Roosevelt hired thousands of painters to paint social realist paintings. In San Francisco, at the Union Hall of the International Longshore Warehouse Union, there's a beautiful social realist painting. And that social realism had a political message. It was about the working class and their struggle for justice, right? And it tended to be, it tended to be very, very revolutionary. It was putting out a political message, and this was something that the ruling class didn't like, but it was very popular among intellectuals and artists and such. So they started covertly funding modern art to obscure that, right? To obscure that, to push back ideas and concepts, and it fit with postmodernism. It's the idea that, well, ideas and concepts are totalitarian, right? And that art that tells people a political message, that's authoritarian, and it's propaganda. And instead, look at, when you just have shapes and art, that's freedom. That's what freedom is. Freedom is not thinking. You think for yourself means not thinking at all. There we go. The ruling class are not loyal to the state. Even the Kennedys went and fought in World War II. There was an article about that in the Wall Street Journal. And yeah, in World War II and prior to World War II and World War I and all of that, yes, many of the richest people were in the military, fought on the battlefield, had loyalty to their country. That's gone. And that's one thing that, like, the Pentagon ruling class, the folks that are tied in with the military-industrial complex are a little bit nervous about. The fact that Wall Street Journal ran an op-ed basically saying that, specifically calling out Silicon Valley and talking about how they don't seem to have any loyalty to the U.S. state, and that the U.S. state apparatus feels like a lot of the millionaires and billionaires nowadays don't have any loyalty to the state. That is a recurring theme. You see that show up in a lot of places. Fox News and conservative outlets are always pointing this out, that many of the rich don't feel any particular loyalty to the U.S. state. That is one of the big contradictions, I think, of our time. And and that's kind of, the Tulsi Gabbard versus Kamala Harris throwdown was largely about that. Tulsi Gabbard's military, right? And it was tied to a lot of people in the U.S. military apparatus who just feel like these wars are not benefiting the long-term interests of the country, right? Whereas Silicon Valley, Hillary Clinton, State Department, Kamala Harris, they're not worried about the long-term interests of the country. They're serving a global financial system. So there is, among the state apparatus, specifically among the Pentagon, there are some, like, nationalist-oriented bourgeoisie that are concerned that the upper levels of power, Silicon Valley, the Eastern establishment, don't seem to be interested in building up the U.S. state very much. They're interested in their financial system and enforcing it with war, but they don't seem to have a loyalty to the particular state. Will we see a united Ireland? Oh, I think it's very possible, right? I mean, it's very possible that Scotland will soon break away from the United Kingdom. It's very possible that Northern Ireland will break away from the United Kingdom. I think it's very possible, more possible than it's been in a long time. The United Kingdom is very likely to not be united for too much longer. I think there's a very real possibility. I think we could see a united Ireland very soon, because of Brexit and the confusion and economic problems. And yeah, I mean, the fact that Scottish independence is rising. I mean, and we could see Welsh independence pretty soon. I think there's a very good chance, because of Brexit and all the confusion, that the United Kingdom will fully break apart. I mean, the military, and the thing is, though, to some degree or other, it's going to remain the same. The military, excuse me, the military will remain the same, etc. All right. First of all, China invade Taiwan. Well, Taiwan is China, okay? So, that would be China invading itself. But the government on Taiwan, being overthrown by the government on the mainland, by the People's Republic, is that possible? It would only be possible if something was done to full-on provoke that, okay? China would much prefer to have the government on Taiwan and the government in Beijing work together and have a good relationship. The only way China would retake Taiwan, or I mean, I don't even want to use that language because Taiwan is China, but the only way the People's Republic would take Taiwan and overthrow the Republic of China would be if there was some kind of direct provocation where the Chinese Communist Party was forced into a situation where they had no choice, which is the USA may very well be trying to engineer that in order to declare China to be the aggressor. They may be very well trying to engineer such a provocation, but we shall see. We shall see. There you go. Did China? Oh, we already did that. All right. The Naxals or the Nazguls. That's very funny. Well, the Naxalites in India, right? That refers to a specific brand of Maoist communists in India that seized territory in the countryside. I believe it's because there was a rebellion in India in the 1960s in an area called Naxalbari. And so, if you are a adherent of the revolutionary movement of Naxalbari, you're considered a Naxalite. A Naxalite. Um, uh, so there you go. I think I had a friend who said, I'd like to eat a Naxalberry. But it's not Naxalberry, it's Naxalbari, I believe. Or someone from India can correct me. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it completely wrong. There was an area, so that the Maoists who operate in the countryside are called Naxalites. Nazgul is a Lord of the Rings joke. I think that refers to like some bad guys in Lord of the Rings. Some of the evil ones are called Nazguls. So there you go. All right. The story behind the new upsurge quote. It is one of the last statements of Mao Zedong. And basically, it's a statement in support of the Vietnamese people and their struggle against U.S. imperialism. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful quote, and it really kind of sums it up. And I mean, it really kind of sums up an anti-imperialist worldview. Unfortunately, after that statement came out, that's when you had the rise of the three worlds theory and the Gang of Four, and they were arguing that actually the Soviet Union were the main danger and such. But that was a very revolutionary and very quotable statement from Mao Zedong. Another passage from the very same statement is the people of a small country can surely defeat aggression by a big country, but only if they dare to rise in struggle. So that also comes from the same passage. The history of the Nazbol movement. I did make a rule: no Dugan questions, no Nazbol thing. Look, I generally make that rule that I don't go there. I mean, there was a political. I'll quickly tell you there was a political party in Russia in the late '90s up until 2007 that dissolved. It no longer exists. Um, you know, and they were a breakaway from the Russian Communist Party, and I mean, I'm not affiliated with them, never have been. And the person that I'm baited widely for speaking to was not affiliated with them. David, I answered that question for a very long time earlier in this stream. David, I gave that was the second super chat I got, David, was Ambimal Guzman, what are your thoughts? And I answered that question for a long time. So there you go. Go and roll the stream back, David, if you want me to answer that. But there you go. So I mean, the person that I'm widely baited for meeting one time and talking at a conference sitting next to was not with that party. Was with them for a while and was kicked out of it. It's just a meme on the internet. It's a dumb meme on the internet. It's a political party that doesn't exist in Russia anymore. And the only person I've ever met who calls themselves a Nazbol is Eric Stryker. And Eric Stryker is a Nazi. He hates Jews. He hates black people. He's a white supremacist. He's just a Nazi. So, that's the only person that I've ever encountered who actually calls themselves a Nazbol. There's no such thing as a Nazbol. Nazbol is this phantom. It's this thing that's been invented to tell leftists what they're not allowed to do. Are you waving the American flag? Well, that's kind of like being a nationalist. That means you must be a Nazbol. What? You're not voting for AOC? What? You want to force the vote? Well, that means you must be a Nazbol. It's this stupid thing people have made up. There are no Nazbols. There are no Nazbols. There were Nazbols in Russia in the late 90s up until 2007. There are people on the right that are critical of capitalism. That exists. But leftists who don't agree with the prevailing narrative are not National Bolsheviks. And even the National Bolshevik Party, from what I understand, it was largely in Russia, having gone there and talked to people about this, it was largely considered to be a left-wing, a left-wing group. So there you go. How would a socialist America address anti-vaxxers? Well, there's a couple ways to come at that. First things first, a socialist government in the United States would have to be embedded among the people, and it would depend on a well-organized base of supporters. So an anti-vax movement would be a lot less likely because the state and the population would be much more closely intertwined. And that's true in anti-imperialist states. You see that firsthand, how closely the government and the population work together. There's a lot more trust there, first of all. Second of all, second thing is that obviously, I mean, right now we have situations where measures are being taken. I think what's largely motivating a lot of the anti-vaxxers is the economic fallout. I mean, they are devastated economically. A lot of them are people who are really suffering economically because of this. And there's not compassion for them. There's not concern for them. And this is causing them to just say, this can't continue. This must stop. This must stop. I need to be able to feed my kids. I can't continue to have a pandemic. I think that's largely the situation that's motivating them. So on that note, folks, I will end with the quotation that I always use. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world